If an avoidant is acting distant, cold, or confusing, do not rush to think they feel nothing. Sometimes the truth is the exact opposite. Sometimes the distance starts right when the feelings become real. That is the part nobody warns you about. Real love does not always enter an avoidant's life like peace. It often enters like pressure, like heat, like something shaking the walls they spent years building. And the more genuine the connection feels, the more their system can panic. So if you have ever wondered why someone got close, opened up, looked deeply invested, and then suddenly pulled away, stay with me. Because what looks like disinterest can actually be emotional overload. What looks like silence can be internal chaos. And what looks like retreat can be the very moment love became too real to control. This is where it gets intense, because when an avoidant begins to feel authentic love, they are not just dealing with romance. They are dealing with exposure. They are dealing with old fear. They are dealing with the terrifying reality of being seen in ways they have spent years trying to avoid. And once that happens, nothing inside them stays untouched. The connection no longer feels casual. It becomes personal. It becomes disruptive. It becomes impossible to fully dismiss. And that is where the real story begins. When an avoidant starts experiencing deep love, it rarely feels soft at first. It feels messy. It feels confusing. It feels like the heart wants one thing while the nervous system wants something completely different. Most people think avoidant people are afraid of love itself, but that is not the full truth. More often, they are afraid of what love wakes up inside them. Real connection acts like a mirror. It reflects the parts they buried. It brings old pain to the surface. It touches hidden insecurity, fear of rejection, fear of needing someone, fear of losing control. For a person who learned to survive through distance, independence, and emotional self-protection, that kind of closeness can feel dangerous even when it is healthy. That is why they may pull away right after intimacy. Not because the moment meant nothing, but because it meant too much. That contradiction is one of the hardest things to understand from the outside. One part of them wants the closeness badly. Another part feels exposed by it. So their system reacts. Their mind starts scanning for danger. Their body remembers old disappointment. Their habits tell them to create space before the bond gets stronger. And if you miss this, you may think the connection failed, when in reality, it may have reached a deeper place than either of you expected. That is the painful irony. The deeper the feeling becomes, the stronger the urge to retreat can become too. Healthy love can feel strangely uncomfortable to an avoidant, especially if chaos, inconsistency, or emotional distance once felt normal. When someone shows up with steadiness, honesty, warmth, and no hidden control, most people would call that safe. But to an avoidant, safe can feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can feel risky. That is why they sometimes move away from the very person who makes them feel most alive. Their system still links vulnerability with danger, even if their heart is quietly asking for more. And this creates behavior that looks deeply mixed. One moment they are open, affectionate, even intensely present. The next they become hard to reach, quiet, distracted, or emotionally flat. From the outside, it can feel like a switch was flipped. Inside, it feels more like a battle. One force pulls them toward connection. Another force pulls them back toward control. Their old emotional structure was built to avoid overwhelm. But love does not ask permission before it stirs what has been hidden. It slips through the cracks. It lingers after the conversation ends. It stays in their thoughts. It follows them into silence. And here is something important most people miss. True indifference is usually calm. It is simple. It is not full of tension. But real feeling inside an avoidant can look chaotic because it disrupts the very system they trusted to keep them safe. So if their behavior suddenly becomes more inconsistent after genuine closeness, that does not always mean the feelings got smaller. Sometimes it means the feelings got too big to hold comfortably. When love begins to matter, subtle changes start happening inside them long before they speak about it. They think about you when things go quiet. They replay your words in their mind. They reread messages. They remember details you forgot you even shared. Your presence begins staying with them after you are gone. Even if they resist the feeling, they cannot fully shut it off. That is what real emotional impact does. It changes the inner world first. If you have been in that push and pull dynamic, understand this part carefully. You did not just trigger their habits. You may have triggered awareness. You may have become the person who made them feel the gap between how they live and what they actually long for. That is why authentic love often begins with tension instead of comfort. Old walls start cracking. Their system begins remembering what real closeness is supposed to feel like. And no, that does not mean you should excuse poor treatment or endless confusion, but it does mean you should not automatically mistake silence for emptiness. Sometimes space becomes part of their processing. Sometimes distance is the form their fear takes when they do not yet know how to stay open. And this is where many stories fall apart too early. One person personalizes the silence. The other person hides inside it. Neither one says what is really happening. So the connection gets buried under misunderstanding, when the deeper truth may be that something real had finally reached a part of them that had been emotionally asleep for years. As the feelings grow, the avoidance distancing can shift in meaning. Early on, distance may be about escaping vulnerability. But later, once they truly care, distance can become preservation. That difference matters. At first, they step back because closeness feels destabilizing. Later, they step back because the connection matters so much that losing it feels terrifying. Now there is something valuable at stake. Now their thoughts become heavier. They overanalyze simple moments. They question their tone, your tone, the timing, the future, the risk. They wonder if they are enough. They wonder if this will eventually hurt. They wonder whether staying open will cost them more than they can handle. So the more they care, the more fear can enter. Their silence is not always a blank space. Sometimes it is emotional weight so dense they do not know how to carry it out loud. This is why they may pull away right after a moment that felt beautiful, intimate, or deeply connected. The moment mattered. That is exactly why it scared them. They try to manage love through distance because direct vulnerability still feels too exposed. They try to contain the feeling rather than fully live inside it. But here is the twist. Even in solitude, they are rarely free from the bond. They keep carrying it in private. They keep replaying it in their mind. And this is the deep paradox. They create distance not because the connection is meaningless, but because it became powerful enough to shake the structure they once depended on. And what happens next can change everything. Over time, an avoidant can start realizing something they fought for years. Emotional distance does not always bring peace. Sometimes it only delays truth. No matter how far they pull back, the connection can keep moving inside them. Not because of guilt, not because of loneliness alone, but because something about it feels alive in a way they cannot easily erase. It is as if love keeps pulling them to the edge of their comfort zone and asking one quiet question again and again. Will you stay this time? Will you trust a little more? Will you stop leaving the moment closeness becomes real? And little by little, a shift can begin. They start seeing that safety was never truly found in control alone. Real safety begins to show up through honesty, openness, calm presence, and the kind of connection that does not punish vulnerability. What once felt threatening starts to feel necessary. What once felt dangerous starts to feel deeply human. That is the transformation real love can start inside an avoidant. The same closeness they once feared can become the thing that teaches emotional courage. The relationship stops feeling only like a threat and starts becoming a reflection of possibility. Not just a mirror of fear, but a mirror of growth. So when an avoidant pulls away after closeness, it does not automatically mean they do not care. Sometimes it means love is trying to exist inside a system that still does not know how to hold it without shaking. And if you really understand that, the whole story starts looking different, because now you are not just watching distance. You are watching an internal war between old protection and a new kind of truth. One of the quieter signs that love is becoming real for an avoidant is mirroring. It may not be conscious, it may not be deliberate, but it starts happening. Their tone softens around you, their rhythm shifts, their communication slowly begins to echo yours. They pick up your calm, your phrasing, your emotional pace. They begin responding to your energy in deeper ways than before. This matters because avoidant people usually work hard to keep emotional separation. Their independence often depends on limiting how deeply another person affects them. So when that emotional distance starts weakening, their system begins adapting. They absorb pieces of how you express safety. They learn through your consistency. When you are grounded, they feel more regulated. When you pull back, they feel the change even if they say nothing. You begin existing in their inner emotional world, not just in their daily routine, and this can slowly expand into courage. They may initiate more, they may check in more often, they may begin opening up in small ways, not dramatically, but enough to show that the wall is not as solid as it used to be. That is important, because love at this stage becomes a kind of emotional learning, not through lectures, not through pressure, through repeated safe experiences, through quiet proof, through moments where closeness does not end in shame, control, or collapse. Keep watching, because this is where many people misread the process. The progress is rarely loud. It is subtle. It hides in the small actions. But small actions can carry huge meaning when they come from someone who once survived by staying unreachable. Then another shift appears, and this one is even deeper. Curiosity turns into fear of loss. The question is no longer, can I handle closeness? Now it becomes, what if I lose this? That is when the bond becomes emotionally serious. Detachment stops working like it used to. Feelings have already taken root, so now anxiety can enter the avoidance system in a different way. Losing the connection is no longer just losing a person. It becomes losing the emotional experience that made them feel alive, seen, softened, and challenged in ways they did not expect. For someone whose identity was built on not needing much, that can feel like a major inner disruption. Their old belief system starts breaking. They thought they did not need emotional closeness, but their own feelings are proving otherwise. And even when they go silent, the bond does not disappear. Memories keep returning. Conversations keep replaying. Specific looks, small moments, tiny details keep looping in their head. Something deeper was touched. And once that deeper layer is reached, it does not simply go back to sleep. This is why losing a real connection can hit an avoidant in ways other people never see. On the outside, they may seem composed. Inside, the structure can be collapsing. They are not just missing a person, they are confronting a truth they tried to avoid for years, that emotional safety and connection may matter to them far more than they ever admitted. And once that truth gets inside, distance starts feeling less like strength and more like a prison they built and accidentally locked themselves inside. This is why an avoidant can retreat even when they feel deeply. The closer someone gets, the more exposed they feel. And in their inner world, exposure can still translate to danger. So they follow the old pattern. They back away, they go quiet, they create space, but this time the space does not bring relief like it used to. This time it feels hollow. The silence that once felt protective now feels empty. The distance that once felt powerful now feels like absence. That is the painful paradox. Love can turn their safest place into somewhere that no longer feels livable. The fortress that once kept them calm starts feeling like emotional isolation. And that is where change can begin. Not in a dramatic movie scene, not in one perfect conversation, but in a slow internal awareness. They begin noticing that control cannot recreate the peace they felt when they allowed themselves to be emotionally open, even for a short moment. And that realization is huge. Because now what scares them more than vulnerability is the possibility of losing something real by hiding from it. This is where fear starts losing a little of its authority. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for them to pause before running. Enough for them to question the old pattern. Enough for them to wonder whether staying might hurt less than leaving. If you are still with me, remember this, because this point changes the entire emotional map. Love is no longer just an experience for them. It becomes a challenge to their whole identity. And slowly, without even realizing it at first, they begin to evolve. That evolution often does not look dramatic from the outside. It looks quiet. It looks behavioral. It shows up in things many people miss. They check in without being asked. They remember small details. They appear in moments where presence matters more than words. They help in practical ways. They become quietly consistent. Their love may not arrive through big speeches at first. It may come through actions that seem simple, but carry real emotional weight underneath. For an avoidant, action can feel safer than raw verbal exposure. Doing can feel more manageable than confessing. So love comes through behavior before language catches up. This is why so many people misunderstand them. They wait for perfect emotional declarations, while the avoidant is trying, in their own guarded way, to express care through stability, attention, and small forms of loyalty. That does not mean every avoidant is loving. It simply means that when they do love, it may come out in quieter forms first. And if emotional safety continues, those forms can deepen. Their affection becomes less forced, less calculated, less controlled. They begin acting not only from fear of losing, but from genuine emotional attachment. This is the turning point from survival-based connection to true emotional participation. And none of this grows well under pressure. Pressure makes old defenses stronger. Safety makes new behavior possible. Consistency matters. Calm matters. Emotional space matters. Not because they need endless patience without responsibility, but because transformation in this kind of heart does not happen through force. It happens through enough safety for the truth to stop hiding, and once the truth stops hiding, the old pattern cannot fully pretend to be enough anymore. When they stop running, even in small ways, something major is happening beneath the surface. It is not obedience. It is not convenience. It is awareness. For most of their life, the instinct was simple: move away from emotional intensity before it becomes too much. But when they stay through discomfort, they start discovering something unexpected. Staying does not destroy them. Staying reveals them. They begin learning that distance never truly solved fear. It only postponed it. And little by little, the nervous system begins forming a different pattern. Closeness does not always mean danger. Emotional presence does not always mean losing yourself. Love does not always end in pain. Connection can exist without collapse. That shift is not just mental, it is emotional rewiring. It happens through lived moments, not theory. They do not change because someone explained everything perfectly. They change because they experience a kind of love that does not pressure, trap, shame, or demand flawless performance. A love that is steady without being controlling. A love that leaves room for breath. In that kind of environment, fear begins to lose intensity. And once fear softens, awareness grows. They reflect more honestly. They communicate more directly. They start taking responsibility for patterns they once defended or denied, not in one giant breakthrough, but in many small acts that signal internal change. A slightly quicker reply, a more direct apology. A harder truth finally spoken, a little more emotional presence than before. From the outside, these may look ordinary. From the inside, they can mean everything, because every small act of staying becomes a quiet rebellion against years of self-protection. The deeper reality is this: real love does not erase avoidant patterns overnight. It exposes what those patterns were protecting. Beneath the distance is often a wounded system trying not to relive old pain, trying not to be overwhelmed, trying not to need too much, trying not to be disappointed again. But when that system finally feels safe enough to remain, even imperfectly, something profound begins to happen. They are no longer only choosing a relationship, they are choosing themselves differently. They begin choosing presence over withdrawal, awareness over avoidance, connection over control. Not because fear vanished, but because love became more meaningful than the protection fear once offered. And that is a very different kind of strength. It is not flashy, it is not loud, it is not perfect. It is the quiet decision to stop running long enough to see that staying was never the danger they believed it to be. And let's be honest, this part matters for you too. Because if you are connected to someone like this, you may have spent a lot of time questioning your own value, wondering if you imagined the closeness, wondering if their silence erased what was real. But someone's fear-based retreat does not always cancel the reality of what they felt. Sometimes it proves how deeply the bond reached. Again, that does not mean you should chase forever or accept confusion without limits. But it does mean the story is often more layered than simple rejection. What you may be witnessing is a nervous system slowly learning that love is not the enemy, and that learning can look very messy before it looks clear. Still, there is another side to this truth, and it matters. Loving an avoidant is not about becoming endlessly available while they remain emotionally absent. It is not about sacrificing your peace to prove your loyalty. It is not about earning closeness through pain. Real healing does not grow in one-sided effort. Even if their feelings are genuine, growth still requires participation. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. It requires the willingness to notice when fear is driving behavior and to do the hard work of not letting fear lead every choice. Otherwise, the connection can become a loop. One person pursues, the other withdraws, one over-explains, the other shuts down. One keeps hoping the next moment of closeness will fix the distance. But real change needs more than chemistry. It needs conscious effort. It needs emotional maturity. So, if an avoidant truly begins to love, one of the strongest signs is not just that they feel deeply in private. It is that they begin fighting for presence in real life. They begin trying to stay in difficult conversations a little longer. They begin naming what they normally hide. They begin choosing repair instead of automatic retreat. That matters, because love is not only what someone feels. Love is also what someone is willing to face, and the more real the bond becomes, the more their actions start revealing whether they are staying inside old survival or stepping into something new. Watch that closely, because words can be delayed, emotions can be buried, but patterns always tell the truth. And if the pattern begins changing, even slowly, then something inside them is changing too. That is not fantasy. That is evidence of movement. In the end, what you are really witnessing in an avoidant is not a lack of feeling. It is a survival system coming into contact with the very thing it never knew how to hold. Genuine emotional safety. Authentic love does not enter and instantly make everything peaceful. It disrupts old rules, it shakes old defenses. It forces a collision between fear and closeness, between control and surrender, between emotional habit and emotional truth. That is why their behavior can feel so hard to read. One moment they are warm, open, connected. The next, they disappear into silence. But under that inconsistency is often not emptiness. It is overflow. It is feeling meeting a nervous system that still struggles to regulate closeness when it becomes deeply real. And yet, over time, the same love they feared can become the thing that reshapes them. Not by force, not by pressure, but by showing them another kind of reality. One where closeness does not automatically end in pain. One where vulnerability does not always lead to collapse. One where distance stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like loss. That is the turning point. Because when an avoidant begins to stay, even imperfectly, they are no longer only reacting from old protection. They are beginning to choose connection. They are beginning to choose courage. Not the absence of fear, but movement through it. Not perfect change, but real change. And maybe that is the deepest truth of all. Avoidant love is not absent love. It is love delayed by fear, filtered through protection, and revealed in pieces. But when it finally breaks through, it shows something simple and powerful. They were never truly running from love itself. They were running from the risk of finally being seen, finally being changed, and finally needing what they once believed they could live without.